My parents unexpectedly re-entered my life when someone deceived them into believing that I had married a wealthy executive. To respond, I decided to go along with their misconception and teach them a valuable lesson. I'm a 27-year-old woman working as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm. For the past 8 years, I've had no contact with my parents. I do have an older sister, Celeste, who is 34 years old. She is happily married with 2 children. While we do communicate occasionally, our relationship isn't particularly close. When I was just 19, an event occurred that led me to sever ties with my parents permanently. My parents are deeply religious Catholics, who took their faith very seriously. Throughout our childhood, they expected both Celeste and me to strictly follow their religious beliefs and adhere to a life path grounded in their spiritual values. Instead of enrolling us in public schools, they chose to homeschool us, believing that local educational institutions did not sufficiently align with their religious views. They had a very clear and specific vision for our futures and exerted immense pressure on us to choose between becoming parents with large families or dedicating our lives to becoming nuns. My parents wanted us to conform to the traditional expectations of our community, seeing these as the only viable options for us. Celeste, who was 7 years older than me, never dated, lived at home until she got married, rarely traveled more than 10 miles from our house, and didn't engage in any group activities in our town. It was evident why she was their favorite child. When she was just 22, our parents arranged her marriage to Matthew, the son of a family friend. At her wedding, they scrutinized every detail, from the readings to the sequence of events during the Mass, even though an ordained priest officiated. Fortunately for Celeste, Matthew turned out to be a wonderful person, and she enjoys a happy life with their 2 children. Seeing that my sister had to marry so young made me realize that I wanted a different life path. While Celeste might have been content with her situation, I yearned for something more. I didn't want to follow the conventional route that my parents had laid out for us. I was a young woman brimming with dreams, ambitions, and a desire for independence. I wanted to build a career, travel, and explore the world. My vision for my future was in direct conflict with the traditional expectations my parents held dear. After graduating from high school, I was determined to attend college, even though my parents were firmly opposed to the idea. I applied to a top university in our district and was ecstatic to receive a full scholarship. However, when I shared this news with my parents, they were livid. My father had a complete meltdown, shouting at me with words filled with disapproval and frustration. My mother, on the other hand, refused to even look at me. They couldn't understand why I wanted to pursue higher education, when they believed I should focus on the traditional path they had set for me. It was a heartbreaking moment, watching the people I loved most in the world react so negatively to my aspirations. The fallout from that argument was significant, marking the beginning of a growing divide between me and my parents that would continue for years. It became clear that pursuing my dreams was incompatible with their vision for my life, and this incident was the catalyst for our eventual estrangement. Starting college opened up an entirely new world for me. I learned ideas that challenged the beliefs my parents had instilled in me during my upbringing. I made new friends and developed a sense of independence that I had never experienced before. My parents, however, struggled to accept these changes. They viewed my newfound independence and the influences from my college experiences as a threat to the values they cherished. Our reunions during college breaks were fraught with tension and misunderstandings. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid topics that would inevitably lead to arguments. The gap between our worldviews was widening, making it increasingly difficult to bridge the divide. Despite all the changes, a part of me still yearned for their acceptance, but it seemed like an unattainable dream. After graduating from college, I was thrilled about the prospect of starting my career. I expressed my strong desire to my parents to pursue a career and eventually move out to follow my dreams. However, my parents were unhappy and didn't want me to pursue a job. They insisted that I should choose a life path that led to marriage and starting a family, in line with their steadfast principles. Our arguments became more intense, emotions ran high, and they fervently urged me to reconsider my choices. When I stood my ground and refused to comply with their demands, they told me to leave their house immediately. I was shocked and taken aback by their angry and abrupt reaction to a decision that brought me so much joy. I gathered my belongings and stayed with my sister for a few months, until I could find my own place. During that time, I made a solemn promise to myself that I would never return to my parents' house. I wanted to live life on my own terms and achieve success and happiness outside the confines of their traditional expectations. My decision to leave and pursue a career deeply hurt my parents. In their eyes, I had deviated from their expectations and disregarded their wishes for me. They responded by cutting off all communication, effectively exiling me from their lives. Over the years, whenever I spoke to my sister, I made sure not to mention my parents, and she didn't bring them up either. Now, regarding the incident at hand, I had been in a relationship with my boyfriend for 3 years, and he proposed to me 3 months ago. We decided to have a simple court marriage followed by a small dinner party with our close friends. I'm not a fan of large, dramatic weddings, and the fact that I couldn't invite my family to the wedding was another reason for keeping it low-key. Everything seemed to be going smoothly for the next few days, or so I thought, until I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I was stunned to hear my parents' voices on the other end. After all those years of silence, I couldn't understand why they were calling me. It turned out that they had learned about my marriage and wanted to offer their congratulations. I hesitantly thanked them, feeling a mix of emotions flooding over me. They continued to ask about my life and well-being, and I answered their questions without much thought. It didn't seem unusual until they began asking how it felt to be married to someone in a higher position at my company. Puzzled, I asked them to clarify their meaning. They went on to explain that they were thrilled I had married my boss. At this point, my jaw nearly dropped. I couldn't comprehend why they thought I was married to my boss. They told me that an acquaintance had informed them of this and that they couldn't be happier. I remained mostly silent, as they continued to talk about how proud they were that I was finally married. My father expressed excitement about meeting my husband and getting to know him, while my mother inquired if I planned to quit my job now that I was married, intending to focus on having children and keeping my husband happy. Their assumptions left me utterly flabbergasted. Slowly, it dawned on me that the only reason they had reached out after 8 years was their belief that I had married my boss, which they thought elevated my status in society. They expected me to now conform to the traditional role of a wife. Their condescending tone and expectations infuriated me, but I decided to play along. I painted a picture of a life that was technically true, as I did have a comfortable life with my husband, but I added numerous lies, such as having 20 housekeepers at our disposal and living in a huge mansion with a swimming pool. My parents eagerly accepted my story, their excitement growing as they asked if I could arrange a meeting with my wealthy husband. Their eagerness to reconnect was solely based on the false belief that I had married my boss, and I found their excitement embarrassing. As I played along and agreed to set up a meeting for the weekend, a plan began to form in my mind. I wanted to teach them a lesson, to make them understand the pain they had caused by refusing to talk to me for all those years simply because I didn't conform to their demands. Now, they were suddenly eager to be back in my life, also they could boast about it in front of their community friends. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and I was determined to make them see the consequences of their actions. I discussed my plan with my husband, but he was hesitant about it. He understood why I wanted to lie, but he was unsure about starting things off on the wrong foot since he would be meeting my parents for the first time. After some convincing, he finally agreed to go along with my plan. I also reached out to my boss, who was actually a woman, and had become a close friend over the years I worked at the company. I explained the situation to her, and she found my parents' beliefs quite amusing. I asked if we could use her house for the day, and she readily agreed. I sent the location to my parents and arranged the meeting they had requested. On the day my parents arrived at the house, believing they were meeting my wealthy boss, their eyes widened as they took in the size of the house and the expansive lawn. My husband and I greeted them, and my father shook my husband's hand with excessive enthusiasm. My mother hugged me and congratulated us on our marriage. My husband, though initially hesitant, played his part flawlessly. He greeted my parents with a warm smile and engaged in small talk, pretending to be the wealthy executive they believed him to be. We sat down for lunch, and my parents couldn't help but notice the team of housekeepers who brought out our plates. My father began bombarding my husband with questions about the house, his assets, and how I had ended up with someone of his stature. Despite my irritation with the questions, my husband maintained the charade, spinning an intricate tale about his wealth, success, and how we had met, all part of our elaborate act. During the conversation, my father, unable to contain his curiosity, leaned in with a twinkle in his eye and asked my husband if he had any vintage cars in his collection, mentioning his long-time desire to own classic cars. My husband continued the act, telling my father that he indeed had a few vintage cars, and they both headed off to explore my wealthy husband's car collection, which actually belonged to my boss. Meanwhile, my mother stayed back and, in a hushed tone, confided in me that they were struggling to make their mortgage payments and were afraid they might lose their home. I was left staring at her in disbelief, as she suggested that now that I was married to a wealthy man, with a huge house and a vintage car collection, I could convince him to help with their mortgage payments. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The only reason my parents had reached out after all these years was because they believed they could benefit from my supposed wealthy husband's resources. They never really cared about me at all. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, and a rush of emotions swirled within me as I waited for my father and husband to return. I could feel the tension in the air. When they finally rejoined us, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to have an honest conversation with everyone. I turned to my father and asked him directly if what my mother had told me was true. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "Well, I didn't expect you to ever get married, let alone to a wealthy man. Now that your husband has more than enough, it wouldn't hurt to share some of this wealth with us." Both my husband and I were taken aback by his words. My father continued, explaining that he didn't have the money to pay the mortgage and couldn't turn to his friends for help, because it would damage his reputation. Seeing my parents' desperation, and their assumption that they could easily gain from my husband's imaginary wealth, I decided to take my revenge to the next level. With a wicked glint in my eye, I looked at my father and said, "You know what, Dad? We can help you with your mortgage, but there's a condition. You must first publicly apologize to me and acknowledge that you were wrong to cut off contact for the past 8 years. You need to do this in front of our entire family and friends at a gathering we will organize." My parents were taken aback, but it wasn't like they had any other option. They reluctantly agreed to my terms. Over the next few weeks, I organized a family gathering, inviting our relatives and close friends to join us. My sister had no idea about the circumstances, and was surprised that our parents had decided to reach out after so long. I made sure to keep her in the dark about my revenge plan, knowing that her strong convictions might lead her to spill the beans to our parents. On the day of the event, I was pleased to see my extended family after such a long time, and meet some of my parents' longtime friends. Everyone congratulated me on my marriage to my supposed wealthy boss, and kept asking if we were trying for children. I was getting irritated with their close-minded questions, but maintained the charade, answering all their inquiries with a polite smile. Amid the cheerful chatter, my father decided to call everyone's attention for a toast. He rose from his seat, raising his glass high, and began by expressing his happiness to be there among family and friends. He congratulated my husband and me on our marriage, continued with his speech proclaiming his pride in how I had turned my life around and was now married to my boss. He spoke about the embarrassment he had initially felt when I had expressed my desire to pursue a career, and how I had supposedly brought shame to his family at the time. He declared that he had now chosen to forgive me, because I had finally chosen the path that he and my mother had wished all along. The room remained still as his words hung in the air, and little did my father know that this gathering was about to take an unexpected turn. As my father concluded his speech, the room filled with respect and a hush fell over the guests. Most of them believed I would rise to thank him for his words, but I had entirely different intentions. It was time to reveal the true purpose of this gathering, to set the record straight, and finally address the 8 years of estrangement with all eyes on me. I began to speak. "Thank you, Dad, for your kind words and for being here today. There's something I need to confess in front of everyone." As I spoke, a collective murmur rippled through the room. "I am married to my husband, but he isn't the boss of my company. My boss is actually a woman and a very close friend of mine, and it was her house that you visited earlier. The wealth and the lavish lifestyle were all a charade. Someone lied to you that I had married my boss, and I went along with the lie just to uncover your true intentions. I insisted on having this gathering so I could reveal the truth about our family." My father's face shifted from pride to shock, and there was a moment of stunned silence. I recounted in front of everyone how my parents had cut off contact with me for 8 years, because they disapproved of my desire for independence and my pursuit of a career. But suddenly, they called me out of the blue when they believed I was now married to my boss, who was supposed to be wealthy. I disclosed that the real reason they wanted to reconnect was that they needed financial help with their mortgage payments. They had reached out to me after all these years with the sole intention of leeching off my supposed wealthy husband and trying to convince me to ask him to pay for them. It was a shocking revelation, as everyone registered the truth. I went on to clarify that although I wasn't married to my wealthy boss as my parents had assumed, my husband and I did have a very comfortable life with equally high-paying jobs. I emphasized that the comfortable life we led was a result of my decision to break free from my parents and pursue a career rather than rushing into marriage and motherhood. The room was filled with a mix of emotions, from surprise and disbelief to understanding and even disappointment. All eyes turned to my parents, who now appeared embarrassed and exposed. The guests started whispering among themselves as my husband and I stood up from our seats triumphantly and left the gathering. Our work was done, and a sense of satisfaction washed over me. I had finally put an end to the facade my parents had maintained in front of their community all this time. All of this happened last week, and the aftermath has been quite revealing. I have been receiving numerous calls since the incident. While the majority of people applaud my courage in standing up to my parents and unveiling the truth, my sister and some relatives believe that I went too far by humiliating my parents in front of everyone. So, am I the asshole for going along with my parents' lies about being married to my boss to take ultimate revenge on them? Update 1 I appreciate all the responses to my post. After reading your comments and suggestions, I felt compelled to call my sister and share my perspective. I explained that I was only 19 years old when our parents kicked me out, leaving me with emotional scars that lasted for years. Their decision to cut me off was solely based on my desire to pursue higher education and choose a life different from what they wanted. It was an incredibly painful experience for me at such a young age. I made it clear that I never looked down on her choice to get married, but it wasn't the path I wanted to follow. I described the hurt I felt upon discovering the real reason my parents wanted to reconnect after all these years. I asked Celeste if she would ever treat her own children differently, and cut them off if they made a decision she didn't like. She solemnly responded with a no. I pointed out that as a parent herself, she should understand that what our parents did to me was extremely wrong. This is why I felt compelled to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. After hearing my side of the story, Celeste expressed sympathy for the challenges I had faced. I had always kept my feelings to myself, so she hadn't fully grasped the extent of my struggle. Celeste admitted that she had no idea how I had felt all these years and now understood why I took the actions I did. While she couldn't entirely stand behind my revenge, she assured me that she wouldn't hold it against me. I was happy after my conversation with my sister. As for my parents, they haven't reached out to me since the incident, and I have no plans to initiate contact with them. Given the way I exposed their truth, I can only imagine they are seething with anger. It remains to be seen whether they will reflect on their actions and attempt to rebuild our fractured relationship, or continue to blame me for their behavior. For now, I stand by my decision to bring these issues to light and hope that they have learned a valuable lesson. Today, while I was at work, my mother reached out to me. She expressed how she and my father felt humiliated in front of everyone, with my father harboring anger towards me. She continued to admonish me for lying to them, but I reminded her that I had simply played along to uncover their deceitful intentions. My mother attempted to justify their actions, explaining that they believed I was finally going to conform to their idea of a good girl, by giving up my career and focusing on my family. I made it clear that I had no intentions of doing so, especially with the financial stability I had achieved and the prospect of a promotion at my company on the horizon. I reiterated that I had no regrets about my actions, as they had only revealed my parents' true facade. She also shared that some of our relatives and friends were now talking about them, and a few had expressed to my parents that what they did to me 8 years ago was wrong. This revelation seemed to further infuriate my father. I didn't want to continue this conversation with my mother anymore, as I knew it wasn't going to lead anywhere, so I ended the call. I didn't want to continue the conversation while I was trying to work. My parents were set in their ways, and so was I. I was just glad that the aftermath of the gathering was creating ripples of change, not just within our family, but also within the broader circle of people who were aware of the situation. Update 2 ***. It's been 3 months since my last update, and a lot has happened since then. Following the advice from many of you, I decided to begin therapy. I realized that I hadn't been dealing with the estrangement from my parents in a healthy manner, and the lingering resentment had been a heavy burden for years. While I had exposed the truth about their intentions, I didn't want to continue holding on to that resentment. Therapy has been a step toward finding a healthier way to address my past and emotions. As for my parents, they agreed to sit down and have a conversation with me, largely due to my sister's heartfelt plea. I had been initially reluctant to meet them, but my husband encouraged me to give them a chance. We all gathered at my sister's place, and I chose to remain silent as my parents took their seats to initiate the conversation. My mother began by expressing her regret for our previous encounters, which really surprised me. She admitted that she had been doing a lot of soul-searching, and had realized that their actions had hurt me deeply. She now understood the pain it had caused. My father, who had remained silent until then, acknowledged that cutting off contact with me 8 years ago had been a mistake and that they were determined to make amends. He explained how their strong commitment to their beliefs had prevented them from seeing things from my perspective. I remained cautious, opting to listen more than speak. Their words seemed to come from a place of genuine reflection, which was a positive start to our conversation. My parents shared how they had been seeking guidance from their community, which had helped them see the error of their ways. While it was challenging, I understood that it was the first step toward some form of reconciliation. My sister appeared relieved with how the conversation was progressing. She had been a silent yet supportive presence during our discussion, and her hope for a renewed bond between our parents and me was evident in her expression. Seeing her optimism gave me some reassurance that perhaps, with time and effort, our family could find a way to heal and reconnect once again. One day, despite the challenges ahead, it was comforting to think that we were taking steps toward repairing the rift that had separated us for 8 long years. I continue to attend therapy and remain open to the possibility of reconciling with my parents in the future, though I approach it with caution. For those wondering about my husband, we're doing great in our marriage. Our married life has been blissful so far, and he always supports my decisions. I feel incredibly lucky to have a partner who loves me so deeply, and I look forward to growing old with him. We're not thinking about having children right now, but we're open to the idea in the future. At the moment, we're just enjoying our lives and traveling the world together.